I wasn't medically trained, but I'd been around this business a long time. It's an awful lot easier for people to learn the medical side than it is to learn the business side. The commercial side is an awful lot harder. I know we're going to solve this problem for these kids and their families.
No unicorns, no brands, just hardworking people who built their business from the ground up, sharing their experience so others can learn. Presented by Larissa Feeney from Kenore. This is Real Business Conversations.
On Real Business Conversations today, we are diving into the high-stakes world of medical technology where the margin for error is zero. Our guest is a 25-year veteran of the sector who has built, scaled and exited businesses in one of the world's most regulated industries. He's here to share what it really takes to bring life-saving innovation to the front lines of cardiology. It's a pleasure to welcome the CEO of Harmony Hybrid, Brian Bailey. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks very much, Larissa. It's lovely to be here.
It's lovely to have you. And my goodness, I am really looking forward to this conversation, Brian. Maybe you could start with, I suppose, give me a brief overview of your journey so far.
Yeah, well, I started in this business a long, long time ago, actually, when I was... As soon as I could drive, we had a family business called Bailey Medical. When I was 17, over the summers, I was doing deliveries and working in the warehouse. And really, it started from there. My father was involved in very early pacemaker implants back in the late 70s and early 80s as an engineer. He would have gone in and on the technical side with the procedures when the very, very early days of pacemakers. And then he got into being a distributor for these pacemakers. And then moved into the world of stents and balloons for angioplasty that people know a lot about these days. So then when I got involved, it was the family business. Worked my way through it. We exited that business in 2005. That was called Bailey Medical. And then I set up another distribution business a few years later called Medilex, which I sold in 2021, if memory serves. Yeah, 2021.
So to go back, did you go to university? What did you study?
I studied business. So I wasn't medically trained, but I'd been around this business a long time. It's an awful lot easier for people to learn the medical side than it is to learn the business side. The commercial side is an awful lot harder.
That's really fascinating, because I actually say that about the industry I'm in too. So, technically you learn the technical regulations and rules and standards, but the commercial acumen, that's not as easy.
No, that's much, much harder. We would often have had the reps, which is what we all were really, and still think that I am. You go out and you meet people and you're introducing new products and they see the nice clothes and the nice car and sure, I'm having a great time sipping coffee. But they don't see all the hard work that goes in behind it and the stress and anxiety of the deadlines and the pressure of targets that are very different. And so they come out of the medical side and say, why don't we, I'd like to do that. I'll apply for a medical rep job. It looks easy, but it ain't. It's anything but. And to learn the commercial aspect and to understand it, that you need to make money to pay the bills, to pay your salary. And if you don't, there's no job.
Brian, your story is amazing, and the passion you have, it really comes across in your story. Can you tell me how important it is for an entrepreneur to have passion?
It's a great question, Larissa, because it's vital, I think, because it's the reason when you've got the rough days, the hard days, that you get up the next day and you go again. Because if you didn't have that, you wouldn't bother. You just wouldn't bother. And for me, I know we're going to solve this problem for these kids and their families and for their extended families. And this will last for 80 years of their life. This is not something that goes on for a few years. This is 80 plus years of benefit. And that's an amazing legacy to be able to think you can leave behind.
Yeah, I find that really fascinating. And I actually was talking about it at an event last week where the commercial, and this is going to get more important, I suppose, the bigger the role AI plays in our sectors. Those that are more commercially aware will understand the realities of the world and the changes that we have to make to adapt. I would have assumed you had a medical background. So there we go. So you have a business background and you applied commercial acumen to this sector.
Yeah. So at the very start, when I started in the sales side, when I was in my early 20s, you start at the really basic products, the really easy things, and you learn your way through. You find your natural happy place, as you do in most industries. And I really enjoyed interventional cardiology. Now, interventional cardiology is quite complicated. It certainly was back then. You've got to think your way through problems. Mm-hmm. And so we'd be bringing in new products and the doctors would need training on the new products. So you'd often be in during the procedures to say, look, that's, this one is the new product works a little bit differently or does this or doesn't do that, whatever it is. Yeah. And you would learn an awful lot by doing that because you'd be in there seeing what they're doing and seeing how they deal with these problems. And that's how you learn, how these things are done.
If you're actually getting into those rooms, is that where you hear what their problems are that allows you to develop solutions to those problems, or how does that come about?
I've always had an entrepreneurial side and enjoyed that side of, especially again, going back to being in the car, driving around, being that rep, you're always thinking and you've got time to yourself. You'd be looking at solutions that could have done better. We could have dealt with that situation and that patient a little better. And if we had that product, we could have done that or whatever. You see what's going to be needed. And I sourced it. That was how I did it. Go to conferences and trade shows and see the new products before they'd hit the market and try and bring them to the Irish market.
But you must have had to build a lot of respect between yourself and the medical community in order for them to, respect what you're saying and to believe what you're saying in terms of new innovations.
That's very hard to do, actually. That is really true. I like to think I probably have a bit of that. And it's just experience. And when you're in that situation, if you're lucky enough to be allowed to go in to see some of these operations and bring a product in, the salesman stays outside. Okay, and you go in and the only objective is to treat that patient the best way possible. Now, that's not the case for everybody. There's plenty of people who just want to sell products. If you approach it, I found early on, as long as you approach that as if it's your own family member on the table, you're respected. The three most important words I ever said were, I don't know. You don't make it up when you're in that situation. And, saying I don't know, also telling them when they should stop. Naturally, people have egos. They want to show that they can do this. And sometimes you need to say, no, I think you should stop here. Maybe we take a pause. That level of respect is built over hard days, really, training yourself, getting education at conferences, all that kind of stuff as well. But it is also about knowing when to say, I don't know, when to stop talking and when to leave. And
you must have got some of it from your background with your dad. Some of it must have come from there, did it?
Yeah, it did. Well, actually, my dad died when I was very young.
Oh.
He was going into these procedures, as I say, doing the pacemakers. And he was going in 5 days a week. So say late 70s, early 80s, you're using x-rays to see where everything is going in the body. Mm-hmm. And so the amount of radiation he was exposed to was extremely high. And he died from cancer when I was 11. And
my mother, well, that was very young.
Yeah, well, it was all, he just had a huge radiation exposure. So then what happened was my mum, who was actually a biochemist, she worked in Vincent's and she'd quit when I was very young, but she had a medical background. She actually grew that business. It was her that grew the business.
So she took the business that he had started
in 1987, when you can imagine how many women were in business in 1987 in Ireland.
Yeah.
She built that business from, it wasn't small, but it wasn't, turned into one of the biggest cardiology distributors in Ireland.
Wow.
She did that. And then I came on board and worked with her. And then we sold that in 2004, early 2005, those kind of dates. And I went over to work with the new guys for a couple of years.
And what triggered that first sale?
Well, it's a good question. It was pretty simple in some respects and very complicated in others. On the very simple level, it was just, my mum was nearly 60. She'd given up a lot to bring up 4 kids on her own and running a successful business.
Yeah.
And she decided she'd had enough.
Fair enough.
I was still pretty young. And she said, look, do you feel like you could run this business? And I said, no, not yet. No.
Okay.
I didn't want to be responsible for her income into her retirement, which I effectively would have been if I'd taken on the business. At that point, then we said, right, okay, we need to sell it. And that's when it gets more complicated. But we were acquired by a really good buyer. I worked with them. They were very good to me. And then after I worked my non-compete, I started again working in that sort of niche cardiology space that I enjoyed, bringing really kind of cutting edge things to the market.
That is a really mature decision. If you think about it, there would have been a huge amount of emotions attached to making that decision. I mean, not least your mum and her path, but also the roots of the business being started by your dad and him no longer with you. And then, you've been mature enough at a very young age to make a decision like that, to say, as you put it, I don't want to be responsible for my mum's retirement, which is completely the case. And that's what would have happened. So you allowed the business to be sold to secure her future, but without having the security in your own future, which was, fascinating.
Turned out to be the right decision because a wave of acquisitions came about 18 months or 2 years later, and our biggest supplier got acquired by an even bigger. These are all US corporates.
Yeah.
And they didn't disappear overnight or anything like that, but that would have been a huge blow that she would have had to deal with, and I wouldn't have had the experience. So it turned out I learned a lot from the new owners and working with them. And then when I set up again, I was more confident in what I was doing.
And tell us about that. So that would have been Medilix. That was around
2007.
Okay. 2 years later, you decided to start again. What made you make that decision?
Well, I always wanted to. I didn't particularly relish the thought of just working for somebody else forever. And also the products that I liked to do, I liked to get, they required a different level of service and going in. And I didn't want to be just, selling the same old. So that's where it came from. I was probably wanted to, do what my dad did and all those kind of things as well. I don't know. But it was actually tough. It was an interesting time to start because it was just before everything really went sideways from the economy's point of view. So actually it stood me well during that period because I had to be very lean.
You must have started off just before the economy turned. So you probably had very high aspirations at the beginning, given where the world was at and where. And then it went, let's
go for survival.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. And you hadn't probably established yourself. You hadn't built up a huge amount of overheads, for example, that you would have had to cut back massively. But at the same time, you would have had to be incredibly lean. Yeah.
I mean, that's both good and bad, as I've learned over the years. I'm sure you have too. It's great to be able to do that. And when we started Harmony, we were lean and we bootstrapped and all those words. But in actual fact, you need to surround yourself with the right people.
Yeah.
If you want to scale it and grow it. And that's something that can be hard for entrepreneurs to do.
It can be, can't it? And we say it all the time, you have to surround yourself with the best people. But then you actually have to let them get on with doing the job as well as them being around you, And you can't micromanage them. Do you do that well?
That's a good question. I don't know. I do my best. I don't think I used to. I think I'm better at it now. And the people that I have around me, the people that I know quite a long time now. There's a lot of trust between our group. And I really hope we build a culture that the business can be there in the future when we're, retired or whatever we're doing in a couple of years' time. And I think that's the core people who start the business. They really add value to the culture. They're the foundation of the culture for a long time. So to pick the right people, trying to delegate properly, giving people that entrepreneurial space for them to come up with ideas and not to limit them. Those are all the things. But I don't know if I do it well or not. I do my best.
I think you've raised actually an interesting point there because you mentioned trust in the same sentence as delegation, right? And I had a conversation earlier today about this topic actually, and we were talking about delegating and perhaps failure to delegate and why we would fail to delegate. And that's why, isn't it? Sometimes we don't trust that it's going to be done or done as well or done to our standard or whatever the case might be.
Yeah.
So having that foundation of trust first and foremost, without that, I suppose delegation is going to fail.
Well, it's useless. So I'd rather have nobody in a role than someone I didn't trust. And that's just the way it is. And it is hard to get. We're not quite at the stage where we need lots of people yet. We're still scaling up. We've still a ways to go before we're in market. But we're already looking at employing a certain number of people and it's hard to get them, the right people at the moment. And then when you look at the use of AI as well and how to integrate that, it's, there's a lot there.
Yeah, there is a lot there. There's a lot to unpack. If I take you back to Medilix for a moment, you grew that business over several years and ultimately sold it. Was it in 2021?
Yeah.
Before I ask you about the decision to exit, the growth journey of that business, can you talk maybe about the lessons that you learned? Because it wasn't quick. It wasn't a couple of years of, I suppose, aggressive growth and then an exit. It was a stable, long-term business.
Again, goes back to probably when I started it. It was so lean and I wanted to keep it like that. I was slightly allergic to taking long-term commitments and also the distribution model. The way it works in the medical device business is that you usually get an exclusive distribution right for a country. Right? Somebody is the distributor in Ireland, somebody in England, somebody in France, whatever. But as I mentioned earlier, the risk is that if you sign a contract with company A tomorrow and then Medtronic buy them in the morning, they're gone.
The contract's gone, is it?
It's not gone, but they'll pay you off. I mean, they'll pay you off, but it's it's nothing, you know.
Okay.
You'd much rather have the ongoing business.
Sure.
So there was that uncertainty always in the distribution model. That made me a little bit uneasy. That was one of the other drivers for me to go, right, well, I want to do something myself. But in terms of growing that business, and it also got to the point during COVID, I think, as well, you realized, you know, what value am I adding here some of the time? You know, there's other things to do.
You thought you could add more to the world in another role?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And also your kids you're growing up and you've got to spend time with them. You know, there's no point just work. I think you've got to have balance in order to do your work properly.
And did you find it difficult to get that balance whenever you ran that company? You did? Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it wasn't impossible, but you could get calls on a Sunday evening saying, oh, we have a case tomorrow morning at 7:30 in one of the hospitals in the middle of Dublin. Yeah. And so they go, we don't have this stent or that balloon or that whatever. Can you bring it into us? Because they knew I would. Okay. Right.
And you're not going to say no.
No, of course you're not. But that's because they trust you. It goes back to trust.
Yeah.
And I had calls on Christmas Day. I had calls on summer holidays, Easter holidays, every sort of day. And you just go, okay, if I can do it, I will.
Okay. Okay, I get it. I understand now, because that's hard. You got to the point where you decided, all right, there has to be more to life than this. Now, that was a long journey. I mean, it was what? Was it 10, 15 years or so?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah, so a long journey. So you got to the stage and you thought, right, okay, the business is at the stage now where it's ready to be sold and I'm ready for it to be sold. How did you go about it? I think our listeners would be interested to understand. You came to the conclusion and then did you go looking for a buyer?
I got approached first by a UK buyer.
Okay.
And I think that probably would have worked out, but the CEO of that business, who's actually a good friend of mine now, had a loss in his family like a week or two after that conversation, and it just fizzled out. You know, It was one of those timing things. And then, but I'd already been in touch with my good lawyer, Colin Sainsbury, and Colin said, oh, hold on, I might know somebody. And he made one or two phone calls, and before I knew it, there was David O'Keefe, who's an Irish entrepreneur, very successful and been in Medtech for a long time. He and I did a deal fairly quickly. The deal was done very quickly. The paperwork now, on the other hand, due diligence.
The due diligence, you found that tough.
It was just all the back and forth from a legal point of view.
Okay.
But we got there and I couldn't have been happier. I have to say it was great to get out, take a bit of time, travel a bit, that kind of stuff.
Brian, you talked about due diligence there. You talked about how difficult it was. Would you have any advice for an entrepreneur who was earlier on in their journey, if they did have an eye on a sale, or indeed if, they didn't, but they were looking to grow a business? What should they be doing now to prevent or to minimize the due diligence pain?
It's a great question, because I think that's something that people miss. And particularly when you're going at 100 miles an hour trying to pay the bills this month and this week even. What I learned with that was when we started the journey with Harmony Medical, I was somewhat fanatical about getting all the pieces of paper in place, filed the right way, leave as many of them as I can with the solicitors, have everything ready, filed, every I dotted and T crossed. It's a pain. It's not my natural skill either, but it's just really, really important. It just removes any questions when you're going through the DD. It just removes needless questions and wastes of time and cost. I mean, solicitors are expensive.
Yeah. And how big was the team whenever you sold the business?
No, small, really. It was just still me. I had a guy working on accounts in the office, warehouse guy. That was about it.
Yeah, small team.
Small team, but it was a very profitable business. I'd come to the conclusion I was limiting it myself. I was the limiting factor, because I got stuck in that rut of being a bit risk averse probably in terms of who I'd take on. I tried to get good reps. It was just really, really hard as a small player.
Okay, so in order to grow the business, you would have had good, decent reps on the road.
Yeah.
You were really limited because you were the only salesperson. Is that right?
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah.
I used a few agency reps and things like that, but it's not the same.
Yeah, not the same. So tell me, whenever you were looking to sell the business and the buyer did you say David O'Keefe?
Yeah.
Did he essentially buy your book of business, your contracts? Is that essentially what the business was?
Yeah, effectively, it was all your contracts with suppliers, because those are, other than there being an acquisition, which did happen, as I said, those contracts are for several years. They're exclusive. They're long-term.
Profitable.
And profitable. I mean, it can be a profitable business But it's a high cost business as well. It's a high cost model to run that level of service. But that's what people expect.
Yeah, okay. That's fascinating. And then for him, then, if it's a nice bolt-on for his own business, if he's in the sector, it probably is something that could be integrated quite seamlessly, I would imagine, into a similar business.
Exactly. That was exactly why, and that's what happened.
Yeah, so you had done all the hard work in terms of building up the business over several years and building those relationships.
Yeah.
Brian, on the subject of selling a business the size that was, so that was essentially not a one-man band, but not too far away. You were the main guy there, right? I'm interested in that because what I do hear a lot in, whenever individuals are trying to grow a business, they feel as if they have to scale. I hear that word a lot. I have to scale in order to create value, to make it sellable. And the narrative being that if you are the only person in the business or one of a couple of people in the business, you've essentially created a job for yourself rather than growing a business that's sellable. And yet you have managed to sell a business, essentially with you in it and a couple of others. So how did you do that? How did you manage to create a business that had value and that wasn't overly reliant on you, even though you were the main man in it?
Well, it's not a simple question to answer. I think the business probably was over-reliant on me. But what I did have were the contracts with my suppliers and my contracts with my customers. In a regulated industry or it's not just that it's in healthcare, but you're dealing with hospitals that are run by public servants, and it is quite a slow process to change anything. Once you're on their books being ordered, it's pretty hard to shift you out of there. There needs to be some really, really compelling reason to do it. It was both on the customer side and on the supplier side. But ultimately, I think the business was too reliant on me. I think that's undeniable. But at the same time, you've got value in other parts of the business that have genuine value. Did
you have to stay with the business for a period of time post-acquisition?
No, that was part of the deal. I really didn't want to. At that point, okay. I was done. And so I said, okay, well, I would be around. I helped, obviously, and all that kind of stuff. And I think, again, you go back to trust, you've got to have trust. And interestingly, just on that point, like David O'Keefe was one of the first investors in Harmony. So, that trust is there.
That trust is there.
But it's really important to have that. David and his wife, Kathy, I should say. I was done. He wanted to scale the business and do lots of other things, and that was fine by me.
Yeah. And let me ask you a question now, because this is something that I see and have conversations around, because we have gone through 3 acquisitions. So we've just completed our 3rd one. And I do speak to firm owners and business owners that are in the position that you were in at that time, where it's just, I'm done. I want out, right? They're just tired and maybe burnt out and exhausted. And then there's others that are happy to stay on for a period of time. And given the relationships with your customers and even with your suppliers as well, in terms of the business model that you were in, it's not too dissimilar, because obviously in this sector, the relationships are key as well between clients and their accountant. Do you think that had you made a decision to sell a couple of years earlier, that you could have stayed with the business for a couple of years and made sure those relationships were solid and have attracted a higher valuation as a result? Or did it make a difference at all?
No, it would have made a difference.
It would have?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
But the hindsight is 50-50,
No, absolutely. That's why I'm interested in your experience, because I think it certainly makes a difference whenever I'm talking to prospective acquisitions.
Yeah, it was one of those things from early on. I was quite clear. If the deal didn't go through, I was going to keep doing what I was doing. That was fine.
Yeah.
And I'd also learned from selling the family business. That was a psychologically challenging time, because, as you say, you've got all these things tied up in it. But you realise the day after you wake up, after everybody's gone out and celebrated, life goes on. You still have to get out of bed in the morning. You've still got to do all the same things. And everybody thinks it's going to be, you have this deadline in your head of this will happen and then, woo, party time.
Yeah.
It's not what happens. So knowing that, I was like, well, no, I knew I wanted to get out. And then the feeling of working with your own business for someone else, I didn't really want to do again.
It didn't appeal to you. You've actually reminded me of something else now. So I know the question to ask you on that before we move on. Did you, or maybe this didn't happen to you because you had already gone through a sale process. I was speaking to a founder recently who got quite depressed after her exit.
Oh no, I was the opposite. I think after the first one, maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
Depressed isn't the right word, but it was just a bit rudderless, maybe.
Rudderless, that's the word. What do I do now?
Yeah.
Phone's not ringing.
Yeah, it didn't bother me at all. The phone kept ringing. Other people asked me to do things, didn't do anything for a long time. I kept working on Harmony in the background, but, it was just nice to take some time.
Oh, no, that's fascinating because I do hear, I'm thinking of somebody else as well that I was talking to, similar story. His story was that he felt he had achieved so much and he had such a successful exit that to the point that the day after the exit, he was driving down the street and he said, I almost expected people to be clapping me as I was driving past because I felt I had done so much. But actually, to your point, they didn't care. The world went and moved on.
Yeah.
He had to live with it, with his successful exit, but at the same time, maybe a lack of purpose in his case.
I totally understand that. Yeah.
Yeah. You had purpose though, which is where I'm going to go next. Brian, you are the CEO of Harmony Medical in Dublin. Can you tell us what the company does?
Harmony Medical are a company that develop products for kids with congenital heart disease, and we try and reduce the number of open heart surgeries these kids are going to have. It actually started in 2018.
Okay.
And Harmony was a company that I'd started for another purpose in 2016. And so I was sitting on the shelf doing nothing. And I was having a conversation with Professor Kevin Walsh and Professor Damien Kenny in the Mater Hospital one afternoon. And we were kind of shooting the breeze, really, getting coffee. And I was talking about how I'd like to do something someday. And I'd had a few ideas already. And they said, oh, hold on, we've got one or two things. Why don't we meet for coffee? And I knew them. I knew these guys quite well. So we met for coffee one Saturday morning. And in about an hour, we'd sketched on napkins, quite literally, our first idea, which is the Harmony anchoring sheet, which is what we're still working on today. Wow. And where this all came from, it doesn't directly come from this story, but I remember a day about 10 years ago when I was doing a stock check in Crumlin Children's Hospital. In these labs, they're using a lot of x-rays, like I said. So there's a control room, which is shielded from x-rays, but got glass so you can see into the procedure. Anyway, I checked the stock and I was checking things off against my phone. What's in date, what's out of date, that sort of thing. And this little girl walked into the cath lab and she was similar age to my daughter at the time, 5, 6, that kind of age, maybe 7. She walks in happy as and hops up on the table and her parents are there with her. And you know when you recognize yourself in other people? Mm-hmm. I saw myself in those parents. They left their little girl in there for an interventional procedure, so a keyhole procedure. It didn't go to plan. And shortly after, and through nobody's fault, it was one of those things.
Okay.
And which happens in medicine. But when you're dealing with adults, that's a lot easier to handle. But when you're seeing kids who it affects, it's really, really hard, especially when you see yourself reflected in them. This little girl was absolutely fine. But I remember then I was leaving. I'd done my stuff. I was leaving. And as I was walking out, I overheard one of the docs talk to the parents and say, listen, there's been a complication. The anatomy wasn't quite what we expected or whatever it was. And we have to do open heart surgery on her. And I still sense shivers down my spine. I remember seeing them crumble almost in front of me. Their beautiful daughter going in for open heart surgery. And she was fine, as I say, but she ended up with a scar from all down her chest, from her belly button. Yeah. So I went home that night and hugged my little girl. I had a big, glass of wine and said, thank God that wasn't me kind of thing. That isn't the day we founded Harmony Medical, but it's the day that I've really found purpose, something I wanted to do. So what we set about was reducing the need for these open heart surgeries in these kids.
Okay.
When somebody's born with congenital heart defects, congenital heart disease, they've got various holes in the heart. It covers a lot of things. And depending on the numbers that you read, but in the US, there's 40,000 born every year. And there's about 28,000 open heart surgeries every year in the US on these kids. Now, there's an alternative, which is keyhole surgery. But a lot of these patients aren't suitable for the typical keyhole surgery going in through their leg or their arm. What they need is direct access to the heart. So what the docs have started to do is they use products that are designed for adults' legs and they put them directly into kids' hearts with a small incision in the top of their tummy instead of a big open heart surgery. And they put this tube straight into their heart. And then they put all the products in through this tube, fix the hole, fix the valve, whatever it is, and then close the little hole. Patient goes home a day or two later instead of being in hospital for 2 weeks and all that. The problem is the products that they're using for this are not designed for this purpose. They're designed for adults' legs and they're using them what's called off-label, which is completely legit. You can't sell products for off-label use, but doctors can decide to use it if there's no alternative. So that's what they do. So
that's fascinating.
What we decided to do was, when we looked at products for this, we kind of thought, well, look, we just do a bit of good here. It was a bit of a mission. And so we designed our first product thinking, well, nice pet project. Then we began to realize that it was a lot more than that. And that's
so this is the product that was sketched on the napkin with 2 professors in the Mater Hospital. So they said to you, look, we have this problem. We're using this product to do this procedure and it's not suitable. We would love to be able to create something that is.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it was a bit of a rambling story there, Larissa. Sorry about that.
That's fascinating. No. It's really interesting to hear how you identified the pain. So you obviously, whenever we run a business or grow a business, you're solving a problem, you're solving somebody's problem. And the challenge for a lot of entrepreneurs is finding the pain. What pain are you solving? And how you found the pain. You didn't intend to find the pain, but just through having a conversation with 2 individuals who understand where the challenges are because they face the challenges. And then you were able to take that problem away and develop a solution, is what you're going to tell me. I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and those 2 incidents were years apart. I just always, that incident with that little girl just always stuck with me.
Yeah.
And to be able to try and help some of these kids, and then you begin to see what an impact these sternotomies have. Most of them are now living well into adulthood, very productive lives, and they need other surgeries during their lives. And it gets much harder to re-access again and again and again. So if you can avoid some of these surgeries, it really benefits the patients for decades, not just for a few years. You're not treating 95-year-olds with whatever problem they have. These are babies.
Yeah,
so what we came up with was a pretty simple solution. In fact, it was so simple we thought someone else must have come up with this already.
Really?
Oh, yeah. We were there. There's no way someone hasn't got this already.
And nobody had?
No. So now we have a US patent granted, which took years, by the way, another nightmare detour. So we came up with the idea and we entered what's called one of these Shark Tanks in the US.
Yeah.
It was late 2018. And this was a pediatric structural heart cardiology event, a conference, big annual event. We entered and we kind of just wanted to get to the final. We were hoping just to get a bit of recognition, but we won.
Yeah.
Because our product was voted for by the docs at the conference. They knew the problems they faced. And they also knew it was an elegant solution, if I may say so myself, but simple. Yeah. And they said, right, we can implement this in our practice. We'll do this.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. We won 25 grand in Vegas, had a great night out, and it just went from there. And then we began to realize we've got something. And when we began to dig into other applications for it, particularly in adults, that's when we realized we're onto something potentially big.
So other applications like what?
So these procedures that I'm talking about in kids, the market it's nice. It's a lovely business to be in. It's a very profitable business to be in. The FDA, from a regulatory point of view, are very supportive because they know all these procedures are being done with off-label products. The end users accept high prices for on-label devices. So it's a very profitable business. But the really profitable business to be in is the adult structural heart space.
Okay. Is that simply because there's more of them? More of the procedures? Yeah. Okay.
Because you live long enough, I'm not saying everybody will need it, but lots of people
But you're probably going to,
Yeah, and that's we're talking about things like replacement heart valves, mitral valve disease. There's a whole host of these sort of things. Most of the problems have been solved in other ways to get these devices delivered through keyhole procedures. But there's all these small cohorts. Statistically, there might be a small number, but in terms of pure numbers, they're quite big. And instead of going for surgery, if you can have a keyhole type procedure, that benefits the patient. But also, from the point of view of if you're Edwards or Medtronic or Abbott or whoever, one of the big suppliers, each of those devices that they put in through keyhole type procedures are valued at somewhere $20,000 to $30,000 each of revenue that they make. So, but if you can't get the tube in place like we have in the right spot, you can't deliver your $30,000 device and you end up doing open heart surgery, you don't sell a device. So it's a win-win-win. And you can also get patients through faster through the hospital.
Okay, so the turnaround is faster, you get more in, everyone's happy, as you say, a win-win.
Yeah.
So the products that you're developing for adults, are you working on like a completely different type of product that isn't around or improving the ones that are around? Or is it a similar approach to the approach you had with children?
It's to be the same device, but different sizes, effectively.
Okay.
But from a regulatory point of view, they're different devices. So, you've got to remember, dealing in a regulated industry, it's very time consuming. It's not you build a mousetrap and that's it. This is, we've been doing this a while. We've done some preclinical animal testing. We have to do some more. We've met with the FDA. We know what we need to do. We've raised money. We still need to raise more. We're still 18 months best from US market launch. So it's a long, expensive process.
So that was where I was going to go next, actually. So that's a nice introduction into that whole area of funding and getting the business, getting the product to market.
Yeah.
What way have you approached that? You mentioned one investor already. How have you approached the funding process?
Well, we did a lot of it ourselves at the start. I think there was 4 of us. There's myself, there's the 2 professors, there's Jonathan Akehurst. Jonathan is a veteran in pharma and medtech. So between himself and myself, we've got the commercial side covered and the 2 docs have the clinical side covered. So we did a lot ourselves.
Okay.
And then when it came to, forgive me, I might get the dates wrong, but 2022, we thought we'd secured funding from a well-known European VC. We had term sheets, everything, 5 million over 18 months. Good valuation, everything was great. And they dragged it on and on and on and on and on. And we had faith it was going to happen, and they never did. So I learned the lesson very early on. Well, it felt like early on now. It feels like early on now. That you can't stop looking for money until it's in the bank. It is not a done deal.
You keep having those conversations.
Oh, non-stop. I'm having them, even though we just closed the funding round, I'm having conversations later this week.
You're thinking, okay, I've got enough money to get me to here. And you're thinking next year, 2027 or whatever funding. Okay.
Yeah, and it just takes so long. People are so slow to get stuff done,
Yeah. So is it VCs now? Is that?
And that's where we're going now. So last year we closed around with the EI, the Enterprise Ireland, with mostly European investors, 2 major UK investors, and 1 out of Germany, then David O'Keefe from here. But the major investors are actually companies that are already in this space and they see what we're doing and they like it. So they've come in early. I think they'll continue to support us, hopefully.
They'll see it through until it gets to market.
I don't think they'll fund the whole thing, but, they'll come in with other people in the next round and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Why don't they do it themselves?
It's a good question. Intrigued. You mean the big companies?
Yeah, because as I said, I'm not really, I suppose, knowledgeable about the sector. And you mentioned the product that works, even though it's, what did you say? It's non-labeled, or how did you describe it?
Off-label, yeah.
Off-label. So there is a product that works, albeit it's not designed for that purpose.
Yep.
So somebody makes that product.
Yep.
Why don't they just tweak it?
Yeah, because it's not that simple from a regulatory point of view.
Okay.
It's also, you'll find that company A makes the product. So the product that they use at the moment falls out of the heart really easily. You've got to remember, a kid's heart is the size of a strawberry. Yeah. That's the problem that we solved. We needed to stop these things falling out. So that was our solution. And the current manufacturer of the products that get used in that space, what they'll do is they'll design a product for where they think they'll make the most money. These are all US multinationals effectively. And they'll go, they're very, very cold and analytical at how they look at all this. And they say, okay, it's going to be for vascular surgery. We're going to design product A. And it gets used in vascular surgery. And then somebody in pediatrics or in, I don't know, whatever, neurology, whatever it is, says, oh, that I could use that for something else. And that's off-label. Now, as a manufacturer, you've got obligations around that. From a regulatory point of view. You're
selling it for one purpose. It's been approved for one purpose.
In the US, you'd go to jail for selling it for another purpose.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So you cannot sell for another purpose.
Okay.
So what they may do is they see, right, while we're selling, they will know that it's happening. And they'll start to build up a record of it and say, well, we need to get some evidence. We need to try and regularize this. But this takes years because in practice, as long as they don't have to do anything to support it, they don't really care. Because it'll still just get bought.
And they're still making the money on it, even though it's not for its intended purpose.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean,
and you guys come along and you're much more nimble.
Yeah.
And you're able to develop something much quicker.
Yeah.
And you're carrying the risk essentially.
Yeah.
So obviously they're happy for you to do that, and in some cases support you to do it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. They're very supportive. I mean, I've had loads of conversations with some of the big companies, but the trick is to get on the top quarter of their first page of to-do list for this year in terms of acquisition. You need a bit of luck. You need the right person, the right time, the right place, all
The
those
right
kind of
relationship.
things. Yeah.
Yes.
And then,
yeah.
And even then, it mightn't go right. So it's a long process.
Yeah, it's a long process. And because you have obviously investors, you've just closed a round, you're talking again, you'll know you'll need more money before you get the product to market, which I think is at about 18 months, best case scenario.
Yeah, best case,
right? Do you have any advice for those who are raising money or maybe managing relationships with investors?
God, I need to give me advice.
Do you find it difficult?
No, actually, our investors are great. And I say that honestly, we're all on the same page. Everybody, as I say to a lot of people, we have a mission, but we're not missionary. We really do want to help these kids first and foremost. That's what we're trying to do. Help these kids not have open heart surgery. The fact that there's a major secondary benefit in the adult market, I'm all about it commercially. That's great.
Yeah. Oh, great.
Right?
Yeah.
But those people who've come with us so far, they see the story around the kids and the impact we can have. And kind of what starts to happen as well, you start to attract the right type of investor and the right type of partners to work with, because there is a story around it. I mean, we're not just about the big, the shiny new products. Ours is quite simple, as I said, but it's clever, it's effective, it's quite low risk in terms of getting to market. Whereas if you're trying to design something that's an implantable that you leave behind, it's huge cost. We're relatively low cost to get into this big market, and we can help the big boys sell more of their doodads.
Yeah, and I can see that in your description, because what you're developing is almost a sure bet. You're not kind of trying to convince the world to buy this. I see that. So the investors that are along the journey, they have a fair idea that, it's in their interest and it's going to work out, and they just need to allow you the time to develop it and to get it to market. Do you feel any pressure from the investors on that point around the time that it takes to get something like this to the market?
I try to have fairly open conversations with everybody about it. Be realistic in what we're going to achieve. Try and limit the amount of noise around it, which is hard. There's always new ideas that you're going, ooh, that's
the shiny new thing.
It's just about to use those very words.
Yeah. I think we all suffer from that.
We all suffer from it, okay? And sometimes the shiny new thing, you're going to, it's worth it. Don't get me wrong.
That's, yeah.
And it's fun. Our investors are helpful, actually. Our CFO became an investor. He's based in the UK, and he got involved, and then he actually joined one of the early rounds and then came and went again in the last round. So, he sees everything. He's seen everything and he's in. So we have these connections with all the people. And again, we have an investor in Germany, and he's a well-known guy in this space. He's CEO of one of the other big medtechs, and he invested personally. So the people who know the business and know the people we're involved with get it.
Yeah. And then investors will hear who's invested, and they'll know them, and they'll know that they'll trust them. So they'll trust their judgment.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think even listening to you telling the story, I can understand, because you're very passionate about solving this problem.
Yeah.
So ultimately, what's the goal here? Obviously getting the product to market and making a difference to people's lives. In terms of you personally, you ultimately want this company to be sold so that somebody else distributes the product. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the goal. However, I'm realistic enough to know it may not happen. So our objective is, first of all, to be what they call a tuck-in acquisition for one of the big players. Because we're patented, we're fairly far along. Once we get a little bit further, even now, we're probably a target if somebody wanted to take us and go, look, we'll finish this off. Or
we'll bring it the rest of the way.
Whatever it is. I'm not saying that's not happening, but who knows? The phone could ring in the morning.
Yeah.
But I'm also realistic enough to know that may not happen. So this has to be a business that's commercially viable on its own 2 feet. So that's what we really worked hard to make sure that is the case, that this is a business that can stand alone, and we build it that way. So, for example, US reimbursement strategy is a major problem in aerospace, and most people worry about the FDA clearance.
Okay.
But reimbursement in the US is a huge issue and is really complicated because it's not a socialized system. So you have to go through a reimbursement process. This takes a long time. So you could get your FDA clearance the 1st of January 2028, and then you go, great, let's go. It's whatever, X thousand euros a time or dollars. And they go, okay, great. Are you on the reimbursement system for insurance company X or Y? Mm-hmm. Oh, What's that? And so you need to have all that done, and that takes a long time and a lot of money.
And do you have to apply to each insurance company separately?
That's a great question. I don't know. And we have reimbursement people who work for us on that very problem, because I know the European system inside out. But the US system is very different to socialized medicine like we have in Europe.
Yeah, I can imagine. I don't know anything about it, but I can imagine if you had to go through a process, if you think that you're ready for the market, and then you could be put back by 12 months or more.
People go broke. People go out of business because of it.
Yeah.
Because you don't have enough money to see you through this. You think, oh, they'll just buy it because it's amazing. They don't.
Yeah, they don't. Oh, it's terrible capitalism, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because as you say, you think, well, this is going to make a difference to children.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you buy it? And then, you're faced with shaking heads and no chance.
Yeah.
Like, the story is fascinating, and I hope you'll come back and tell us whenever the company has got the product to market and tell us about the next steps and what happened.
Love to.
In the meantime, Brian, would you have any advice for somebody who's starting out? Because you have gone through 3 businesses, essentially, mid-journey on the 3rd. What advice would you give for somebody who has an idea, who knows the pain they want to solve, but doesn't know where to start?
Firstly, you need to be patient. This is such a long process, and people call it a journey, and I go, no, sometimes that's not the right word. Doesn't feel like it. You need patience. You need perseverance, all those kind of things. In terms of advice, for me, it's some of the little things, like having the right support behind you at home. You don't want to be under pressure at home because this is hard. It's uncertain. You need to be sure that you're comfortable with all those things, with that uncertainty, with that sleepless nights sometimes, all those things. The days where you go, it's not going to work. This is it. We're done. And then the next day you get up and, okay, I'll try a little harder. But in terms of specific advice, I think that my most important thing is to have the right people with you. Really try not to compromise on that, which is, probably an impossibility, but do your best. Accept people's limitations, but find workarounds for that. I don't know. I am still learning. Every day is a school day. This is my first podcast, so, hey, learning how to do podcasts.
Well, you taught me a lot today. I really enjoyed listening to you. Brian, thank you. Thank you so much. This is Brian Bailey, CEO of Harmony Hybrid. Thank you for sharing your journey and your insights today. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Larissa. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to Real Business Conversations with Kenor. For more information on this episode, see the description area of this podcast or visit our website, kenor.com. Remember to press follow on your podcast player now so you'll get a brand new episode every single month. This podcast is produced by DustPod.io for Kenor Finance and Business Services.